There lived in one village a woman called Varvara, whom everyone considered a blessed fool. She was a lonely and ugly woman, and no one even knew how old she was. Her skin seemed wrinkle-free and smooth, but she looked as if everything in the world had long been bored with her. However, Varvara rarely focused it on anyone's face. She was too withdrawn to communicate even with her eyes. The strangest thing was that no one remembered how she appeared in the village. After the war, everything was mixed up. Many people left, outsiders came, some stayed for good. This woman must have been one of those wanderers in search of a better life. She took over the outermost of the vacant houses by the woods, a very small and dilapidated one, and within a dozen or so years she had left it in a state of complete disrepair. Sometimes a neighbor of hers would fix the roof, and then would mutter into his smoked mustache, "Oh, no thanks." She had rainwater banging from the ceiling into a basin. I did it all. It became dry, but this barber not only did not say thanks, but did not even look at her face. No one knew what she lived on, what she ate. She always wore the same rag dress, the hem of which was heavy with dried mud. It was the same dress, but it smelled not of the thick musk of human excrement that doesn't wash off her skin, but of basement and mold. And then one day, in the early 60s, one of the local boys, having had too much vodka, broke into her house. Either he was coaxed by someone, or the desire for abstract femininity was so strong that the object no longer mattered. It was a quiet, clear May night, full moon, with dense scents of blooming grasses and waking up crickets, and before that the whole village was celebrating the victory. An accordion was playing, pies were smelling, and they were drinking and carousing. The boy's name was Fyodor, and he was 25 years old. He broke into Barbara's house, and right away, in the hall, he felt uncomfortable. The house had a strange smell, emptiness and decay. Even Uncle Sryaj's house smelled different, even though he drank himself to death when Fyodor was a baby. Uncle Sryaj's place smelled like a warm stove, heavy sweat, unwashed feet, sour milk, rotten rags. It was disgusting. And yet in the cacophony of smelly aromas one could feel life, though almost degraded into existence, but still. At Varvara's place it smelled as if no one had been in her house for decades, a damp cellar, dusty curtains, and mildew. Suddenly Fyodor wanted to turn around and rush away, but somehow he talked himself that it was not the man's way. And he moved forward to the touch, because the house was in darkness. The windows were curtained from the moonlight with some kind of rags. He pressed his hands against a door, which gave way and opened with a soft creak. Fedor stepped carefully inside, hitting his head lightly on the lintel. Barbara was not tall, and the doors in the house to her liking. Because of the darkness, Fyodor quickly lost his orientation in space, but suddenly someone cautiously hissed in the corner, an animal horror, which on most people brings darkness in combination with unfamiliar place, suddenly awakened in a guy warrior and barbarian. Fedor darted forward with a short cry. "Go away," came the voice of the barbarian, quiet and muffled, and Fedor could have sworn he was hearing it for the first time. Many were sure that the queer woman at the edge of the house had gone numb during the war years, and had never regained consciousness. She put her hand to the window, drew back the curtains, and at last Fyodor saw her. Her still, ugly face seemed dead in the bluish light of the moon. There it was. He tried to keep his voice alert, but the excitement made him cock a hoop, and, annoyed at himself, he vented his anger on Barbara, jabbing his fist in her lifeless face. Come on, I'll be quick." She did not resist, and that calmness gave him strength. She must be dreaming of it herself, glad to death, and can't believe her happiness, he thought. It must have been 20 years since she had a man, if not more. Varvara was wrapped in a sort of cloth, like a shroud. Fyodor seemed to unbutton the top of her coat, but under it was some sort of hodgepodge, and even deeper, something what appeared to be nylon, slippery and cool to the touch. In the end, enraged, he tore at the rags, and they cracked and almost crumbled in his hands. But Barbara lay still, silent, with her arms at her seams, like a dead woman who was being prepared for ablution. Her eyes were open, and out of the corner of his mind Fyodor suddenly noticed that they were not gleaming, mad eyes like a doll's. But the volcanic lava was already boiling in his blood, wanting to pour out, freeing him from the fire. and he almost didn't care who unlocked the mouth, whether it was a warm woman, a spitting fist, or this grey doll. Varvara's breasts were like the empty canvas bags in which Fyodor's mother kept the nuts he gathered in the woods. There was no fullness or milky softness in her breasts, and her nipples were like wood mushrooms, rough and dark, and one did not want to touch them. At that moment, Fedor's mind seemed divided. One part of him could not understand how he could desire that wilted, waxen body scary, disgusting, and the other part, as if bewitched, only obeyed the blind will, impulse, and passion. He moved his knee across Varvara's thighs, which were as cool and grayish as wax, and with a jerk he entered her, and that part of Fyodor's mind, which was fearful and disgusting, seemed to think that his flesh was entering not into a woman but into a jar of cold Ryashenka. Inside Varvara was loose and cold and wet. And so, having poured his seed into her, Fedor left, tangled in his pants on the way. He felt as if he had been plowing all day in a forest clearing, but he attributed this weakness and dizziness to the vodka. He got home and went to bed without undressing. All night long he had nightmares. He dreamed that he was walking through the village cemetery, between the graves, and from all sides his hands, covered with earth, were reaching out to him. They tried to grab his pant leg, and their fingers were icy and hard. His ears were buzzing with voices devoid of the juice of life, begging, and me, please, and me. Here on the path before him was a girl. She stood with her back turned, frail and short, her long wheaten hair strewn about her shoulders. She was wearing a wedding dress. Fedor rushed toward her as a goddess, a savior, but here she slowly turned around, and it was clear she was dead too. Her pale face was streaked with greenish spots, her once plump upper lip was half bent back, exposing her teeth, and there was no luster in her eyes. "Come to me," she murmured. "Come here. They buried me in my wedding dress on purpose. I have been waiting for you." Fedor woke up to his mother splashing ice-cold water in his face. "You've gone completely insane, you drunkard. Drunk as hell, and shouting all night long, as if I had nerves of iron." Several weeks passed. For the first few weeks he could not shake off the feeling of homesickness that seemed to spread its heavy wings over him, blocking out the sunlight. He lost his appetite, his desire to laugh, work, and breathe. But gradually he somehow recovered, came to his senses, began again to ask his mother for the morning pancakes, looked at the most beautiful girl in the village, Julinka, with long thick braids and devils in her eyes. He tried not to meet Varvara, though this was not difficult. She rarely left her house and front garden, and if she did go out into the village street, she huddled by the side of the road and looked at her own dusty galoshes rather than at the people she met. Gradually the strange night faded from his memory, and Fyodor was not even quite sure of its reality. His consciousness became a snowball of real facts and the nightmares that followed, and there was no telling what was real or what was a false image his inner darkness had conjured up. Winter has come. On winter evenings, Fedor spent his evenings carpentry, a trade his father had taught him, and they were both good hands. People from all over the neighborhood came to him, to build a dining room table, to mend a fence, to add a terrace to the house. And then one day in late November, a strange thing happened. There was a knock at the door, insistently, as if it was an urgent matter, and when Fyodor opened there was no one outside. The man who had disturbed the evening peace of the family seemed to be dissolved by the icy space spitting wet snow. Only the envelope on the floorboard, pinned on a wet stone, was white. Looking around, Fyodor picked it up, looked inside, and was even more surprised there was money inside. Not millions, but a respectable sum, the amount he would have asked for just for the construction of a summer terrace. For the realities of the village, it was something out of place. The neighbors, of course, were not hungry, but there was nothing to save money from, and everyone preferred to pay for the work in installments. Along with the bills, a note fell out of the envelope. "I ask you to make a coffin, length 1 meter, material oak or pine. Take the money immediately, and for the finished work I will come at the first opportunity." Fyodor was not the shy type, and certainly not superstitious, but something inside him felt cold when he finished. It was 1 meter long. So the coffin was a child's coffin. Why would they pay so much for it? If the customer had asked him for price, Fyodor would have given him a sum 20 times less than that, and he would not have considered himself offended. Why did they choose such a strange way to make the order? Such grief that the faces of strangers make you sick. But it turns out that he did not even have a choice who to return the money. Can, of course, and keep them in an envelope, and when the customer shows up from the threshold to shove him back. On the other hand, and if there is a child dying, and then the person comes and nothing is ready, shall I bury him in a towel? It was hard on Fedor's soul, but still he got the job done. He did it in 2 evenings. He used the best planks and made every effort as if he were making a casket for the emperor's jewels. He even carved the lid. There was nothing to do on winter evenings anyway. A week passed, another week, and then the third began, but no one came for the work. The little coffin stood in the already crowded hallway and got on everyone's nerves. Fedor's father used to say grimly as he passed by, "Eat," and his mother once stumbled on it, accidentally kicked the wood, then came to her senses and sat down on the ledge and wept shortly. And then, one evening on New Year's Eve, Fyodor was left home all alone. His parents and little sister had gone to a neighboring village to visit relatives, and were going there to spend the night. The evening was dark and frosty. Behind a thick shawl of snowfall, neither earth nor sky could be seen. Suddenly there was a knock at the door, the same insistent, hurried knock. Fedor recognized it at once, and the boy's heart sank as if from an endless slide of ice. Cautiously approaching the door, he asked who it was, but he was not answered. Crossing himself for some reason, he unlocked the door. On the porch stood a short woman, wrapped in a woolen shawl and a large woolen scarf. Fyodor did not even immediately recognize her as Barbara, and when he saw her emotionless gray face, he recoiled. "What do you want? Why do you come here?" He tried to draw strength from her overt rudeness. "So it's time," she answered muffled, and then she passed him on her way inside. "I thought I had a few more weeks, but now I see I haven't. It is time." "What are you talking about, you fool? Go back to where you came from." And then Varvara raised her face at him. Fyodor retreated a few steps, his eyes helplessly scattered in the hall, until he stared at the small axe with which he and his father chopped wood for the furnace. "This is nonsense. I won't go at her, a weak woman, with an axe. I can beat her with my finger. What will she do to me, poor thing?" And the woman just stared at him calmly, and her eyes were like ice-covered puddles, as dull and puppet-like as the night he had been trying to forget all these months. Varvara grinned, still emotionless. "What on earth are you up to, Vedya? You thought you would have your fun and not have to answer. Bring water and rags, I'm in labor." "What the fuck?" Only then I saw a huge round belly under her open turtleneck. "It's gonna start any minute now. What's the holdup?" She did not look at all like a woman anxious about her firstborn child. Bloodless, calm face, weathered lips, level, quiet voice. "Besides, I paid for it." "Fair enough. Did you do as I asked? Did you make it?" Fyodor did not even immediately understand what she meant, and when he did, he suddenly felt small and defenseless. Just like in those years when his father frightened him with a leshem and a bathster, and Fedya spent the whole night trying to calm his breathing. All he could see were rustles and murmurs, some other life, hidden from the adults, which begins in the house, when everyone goes to sleep. He wanted to rush to his mother, to breathe in her soothing warmth, but shame got in the way. "Why do you need a coffin?" He breathed the last word into Barbara's face in a low whisper. "Why?" She grinned. "Somewhere he has to sleep. A dead baby will be born." She stroked her tight belly. Fyodor felt sick to his stomach. "Put the water on," commanded Varvara. "And rags." It was beginning. As in a dream, he reached the stove, got the kettle, then climbed into his mother's chest and found some old sheets. Everything that was going on seemed like a silly prank to him. He could not believe that the village idiot was really going to give birth in his hayloft, that he would have to take part in it. And that damn money, and that coffin. The dead one's going to be born. When Fyodor returned to the interim, Varvara was already lying on the floor, her skirts up and her bloodless legs spread apart, her back arched as if the woman had been struck by lightning. but her face still expressed neither fear, nor pain, nor anticipation. Fedor's little sister was also born at home. The contractions began suddenly. It was also winter. They would not have had time to get to the village hospital. He remembered his mother's flushed, sweaty face, her womb-like cry, more like an animal roar, the way her and the smell in the room hot, thick, and gut-wrenching, and how uncomfortable he felt too. But it was another fear, the fear of some eternal regularity. His mother asked now for a drink, now to put a handful of snow to her forehead, then to open the window, then to close it. And then he heard his little sister crying, and he and his father drank a drink, rejoicing, and mother looked so happy, even though all the blankets were soaked in her blood. Varvara, on the other hand, silently, clenched her teeth, produced new life. She worked her hips and back nimbly, like a snake, and the halls also filled with a foreign smell: peat bog, mulch, damp tree roots, earthworms. Suddenly it gushed, sweat-laden hair spread over the pillow, gushed out, as if a faucet had opened, and the water came out, greenish-brown, like a stagnant pond. Fyodor had to jump away. There was so much stinking liquid that the whole floor in the hallway was flooded. He did not even immediately notice that in this slurry crawled out of her womb into the light of a tiny creature, a baby, as gray and lifeless as his mother. Varvara sat up, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, and picked the baby up from the floor. It wiggled its arms languidly. His eyes were open, as if covered with a whitish film. Fyodor looked away. It was somehow unpleasant to look at the child. Something about him was not right. He didn't even shout, but he was already turning his head, evidently trying to look around. "What are you standing there?" Barbara called grimly. "You must cut the cord. Ollie has not read books." "I do not know how," she muttered, almost fainting from fatigue and disgust. "What is there to know? There's an axe over there. Use it to chop it up." "What are you talking about? Can you do it with an axe?" "I'll call Alexey's grandmother." Suddenly a life-saving thought occurred to him. "I'll just run after her. She knows how to do it." "And no need to call anyone," Varvara stopped him. "It is your own fault. You will be responsible. Get the axe. I'll teach you. And carry the coffin. He's already sleepy, see?" "Varvara, why does he need a coffin? What are you talking so badly?" Fyodor couldn't stand it. "Where has it been seen that a child sleeps in a coffin? You said he'd be born dead, but he's moving." "So I am dead." His gray lips stretched, but it did not look like a smile. "And don't you understand? Get the coffin. You ought to get some rest yourself.